I never thought I'd walk into my own house and feel like a complete stranger. But there I was, standing in the doorway, frozen, staring at a scene that didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. The bag of groceries I was holding slipped from my hands, the soft thud of vegetables and cans hitting the floor barely registering through the rush of blood pounding in my ears. Michelle, my wife of 12 years, was sprawled on the living room couch, her bare legs tangled with a man I had never seen before. She wasn't shocked, she wasn't embarrassed. Hell, she barely even looked surprised. Beside her, my daughter Jennifer, my sweet girl who had always been so quiet and focused on school, was in a similar position, another guy draped over her. Laughing like this was some regular Saturday night, and not the most horrifying moment of my life. My mouth went dry. I didn't even know what to say. Michelle finally turned her head lazily, one arm still hooked around the guy's shoulder. Her lips curled into a slow, mocking smile that chilled me to the bone. Well, if it isn't Mr. Busy himself. Guess you decided to finally come home. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her voice, casual, almost bored, made the bile rise in my throat. My eyes darted between her and Jennifer, but neither of them seemed remotely concerned. My daughter. What the hell was she doing here, involved in this mess? What the hell is going on? The words came out hoarse, barely a whisper. I wasn't sure if I was asking Michelle or Jennifer, or maybe the universe itself. Michelle rolled her eyes, her tone dripping with condescension, as she swung her legs off the couch, like I was the one who had done something wrong. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Greg. You're always showing up at the worst times and ruining everything. I swear, it's like you enjoy being the wet blanket. I took a step forward, my legs heavy, heart racing, ruining everything. Are you out of your damn mind, Michelle? What is this? What the hell are you doing with? Relax, Dad. Jennifer's voice cut through the chaos, cool and detached, as she shifted under the arm of the guy sitting next to her. It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. Not a big deal. I stared at her, at both of them, like I was looking at strangers. They weren't even trying to explain. No excuses, no scrambling for words. Just pure indifference, like I was the one in the wrong for caring. Michelle stood up, casually adjusting her shirt, completely unfazed. Greg, listen to me. You've been so wrapped up in work, you haven't even noticed what's been going on around here. You're always at the office, or traveling, or whatever the hell it is you do. So don't come in here now, acting like you're the perfect husband who's been paying attention. News flash, you haven't been. My hands clenched into fists, and I fought the urge to throw something, anything, to make her understand how messed up this all was. I've been working my ass off for this family, Michelle. For you. For both of you. And this is how you repay me. Michelle's smirk widened, like she was enjoying watching me unravel. Oh, please. You think money and paying the bills is enough to keep a woman happy? Newsflash, Greg, it's not. You've been absent for years. You think I'm supposed to just sit here, bored out of my mind, waiting for you to grace me with your presence? I felt like I was losing control. The room spinning. My head was pounding, my vision blurring with rage. Jennifer hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched, and that hurt the most. My daughter, the girl I'd raised, the one I thought I knew, was just sitting there, not even bothered by the situation. I could barely breathe. And what about her? I gestured at Jennifer, my voice rising despite the lump in my throat. What the hell does she have to do with this? Why is she? Why are you? Michelle shrugged, like the answer was obvious. Because she gets it. You've been absent for her too. She's been looking for attention, for excitement, and you haven't been around to give it. You should have seen this coming, Greg. I couldn't take it anymore. The room felt too small, too hot. The walls seemed to close in, my thoughts spiraling out of control. I needed to get out of here before I exploded. Before I said or did something I couldn't take back. But as I took a step toward the door, Michelle's voice, cold and sharp, stabbed me in the back one last time. Where do you think you're going? Running away again? Typical. I stopped, turning to look at her, my body trembling with rage. I'm not the one who's been running away, Michelle. You are. With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. But even as I stepped outside, The weight of the betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my life, had crumbled in an instant, and there was no going back. I slammed the front door behind me, but the noise barely registered over the roaring in my ears. My chest heaved as I stood there on the front steps of my own home, a place that now felt like some kind of twisted battleground. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't tell if it was from anger, shock, or something worse. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Everything felt unreal, like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. How could this happen? The question kept running through my mind over and over again. 12 years of marriage, a daughter I'd watched grow up, and in one moment it all felt like a lie. I glanced back at the door, still half expecting it to burst open, for Michelle to run out after me, to beg me to come back, to say it was a mistake. But no, there was nothing, just silence. They were still in there, probably laughing about me, about how ridiculous I looked storming out like that. My fists clenched at the thought. My own wife, my daughter, they were in there with those men, and they didn't even care. They didn't care about how I felt, about what they were doing to me, to this family. I fumbled in my pocket for my car keys, desperate to get away from this house, from the reality that was threatening to crush me. The cool metal of the keys in my hand felt grounding, but only for a second. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, threatening to suffocate me. I needed space. I needed to think. The engine roared to life, and I pulled out of the driveway, not knowing where I was going, just needing to be anywhere but here. As the houses blurred by, my mind kept going back to the scene in the living room. The way Michelle had looked at me, so casual, so cold. The way Jennifer had barely said a word, like I wasn't even her father anymore. I slammed my fist on the steering wheel. How the hell did it come to this? I muttered to myself, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. It wasn't supposed to be this way. We were supposed to be a family, damn it. I worked hard, did everything I could to provide for them. But somewhere along the line, everything had fallen apart, and I hadn't even noticed. Michelle's words kept echoing in my mind. You haven't been here. You haven't been paying attention. Was that true? Had I really been so blind, so caught up in my work that I'd missed the signs? Transcribed, but even if I had, how could she justify what she'd done? There was no excuse for this, none. I pulled into an empty parking lot, turning off the engine and letting the silence settle over me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as the shock slowly started to wear off, replaced by something much darker. Anger. No, fury. How dare she? How dare she act like I was the problem, like I had driven her to this? And what about Jennifer? My daughter. The person I thought I was raising right. Someone I thought would never betray me like this. I punched the dashboard, the sharp pain in my knuckles grounding me, if only for a moment. She turned her against me, I whispered, my voice thick with resentment. Michelle poisoned her against me. That had to be it. Jennifer wouldn't do something like this on her own. She was just a kid, caught up in whatever sick manipulation Michelle had been working on for who knows how long. That's why she looked at me the way she did, like I was a stranger, not her father. I leaned back in the seat, trying to catch my breath. The rage was still there, boiling under the surface, but now it was mixed with something else. Hurt. Betrayal. I had given everything to this family, and they'd thrown it all away like it was nothing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. For a moment I thought maybe it was Michelle. Maybe she'd finally come to her senses, realized what she had done and wanted to fix it. But when I pulled it out, it was just a work email. I stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of me. Work. The thing that Michelle claimed had driven her to this. Was it really that simple? Had I really been so consumed by my job that I'd let everything else fall apart? I shook my head, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. No, this wasn't about work. This was about choices. Michelle had made her choice when she let those men into our house, and Jennifer had made hers when she decided to go along with it. They were both adults. They knew exactly what they were doing. But now what? What was I supposed to do with this? Divorce. The thought made my stomach turn. I had never even considered it before. Despite all our ups and downs, I had always believed we'd make it through. But now I didn't know anymore. The sound of a car pulling into the lot made me glance up. A couple was getting out of their car, laughing as they headed toward the diner across the street. They looked so normal, so happy for a moment. I envied them, wondered what it would be like to go back to that kind of simplicity, where everything made sense and you didn't have to question the people you loved. But that wasn't my reality anymore. My reality was shattered, broken beyond repair. As I sat there in the darkness of the car, the weight of everything settled over me like a heavy blanket. I knew I had to make a choice, stay and try to fix what was left of my marriage, or walk away from the wreckage and start over. But right now, the thought of either option seemed impossible. The car felt like a cage. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the darkened parking lot, trying to make sense of everything. But there was no making sense of this. My wife and daughter, the two people I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, had become strangers in an instant. The shock was giving way to something darker, something heavier. I started the car again, not sure where I was going. I couldn't go back home, not after what I'd just seen. But I couldn't sit here either, alone in this parking lot, drowning in my thoughts. I needed to move, to get away from everything. Maybe if I drove far enough, this nightmare would fade into the distance. As I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, my mind kept replaying the scene in the living room, over and over like some sick loop I couldn't escape from. Michelle's voice, "You've been checked out for years, Greg. This is what happens when you neglect your family." Jennifer's cold eyes, barely recognizing me. And when they finally came, they spilled out in a rush. Everything, from walking into the house and seeing Michelle and Jennifer with those men, to the cold, dismissive way Michelle had spoken to me. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse, and the weight of the story had settled in the room like a dark cloud. Steve sat back, rubbing a hand over his face. "Jesus, Greg, I don't even know what to say. That's messed up, man." "Yeah," I muttered, sinking into the armchair across from him. "Tell me about it." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Look, I know things have been rough between you and Michelle for a while, but I never thought it would come to this." Steve sighed, shaking his head. "Man, I don't know. It sounds like Michelle's been checked out of this marriage for a while. You said it yourself, she didn't even try to hide it, like she wanted you to see. Like she didn't give a damn about your feelings." The bitterness in my chest flared again. "Yeah, well, she made that pretty damn clear." He paused for a moment, his expression hardening. "You can't let her get away with this, Greg. You know that, right? You can't just go back there and pretend this didn't happen. She crossed a line that you can't come back from." I stared at the floor, his words hitting me like a punch. What the hell am I supposed to do, Steve? Divorce? Kick her out? What about Jennifer? She's my daughter, man. How am I supposed to deal with that? Steve didn't answer right away. He just sat there thinking before finally speaking. "Look, I know this is brutal, but you need to protect yourself. You need to think about your future. Michelle clearly doesn't care about the marriage anymore, and if Jennifer's involved in this, well, that's something you're going to have to work through with her. But right now, you've got to focus on you. Get some space. You can't think clearly with all this fresh in your mind. Take some time to figure out what you want, but don't let them walk all over you. Michelle's already shown you who she is." I nodded, though the idea of leaving felt like admitting defeat. But what other choice did I have? I couldn't stay in that house, not after what I'd seen. And maybe Steve was right. Maybe the only way to move forward was to walk away, at least for now. As I sat there in his living room, the weight of the decision settled over me. I wasn't ready to face what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after this. The ride back to the house felt longer than usual, the weight of Steve's words pressing down on me with every mile. I wasn't ready for what was waiting behind that door. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized he was right. Staying in that house, pretending that everything could somehow be normal again, it was impossible. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I couldn't live like this. When I pulled up to the driveway, the house looked dark, still, like nothing inside had changed. But I knew better. It wasn't just the structure of this house that had crumbled. It was everything inside of it. The home I'd built with Michelle, the memories, the plans for the future. All of it felt like ashes in my mouth now. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door. A part of me wanted to go in there, to confront Michelle one more time, to demand answers, to scream and let the anger out. But another part of me, the part that had been exhausted by all of this, just wanted to walk away. No, not yet. I grabbed my phone and dialed Michelle's number. The ringing felt like a countdown, ticking away the last remnants of whatever connection we had left. After 4 rings, she picked up, her voice as cold and dismissive as it had been earlier. "What now, Greg?" For a moment, I almost lost it again, the sound of her voice triggering all that rage bubbling under the surface. But I forced myself to stay calm, my voice low and controlled. "I'm coming in to get a few things. Then I'm leaving for a while." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her mind. Finally, she let out a small, almost annoyed sigh. "Fine, do whatever you want. Just don't wake Jennifer up." That hit me like a slap. Don't wake Jennifer up. After everything that had happened, that's all she had to say. "I won't." I replied shortly and hung up before she could say anything else. I couldn't take listening to her voice any longer. Stepping out of the car, the cool night air hit me, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside. As I walked toward the front door, my footsteps heavy, I realized this was the first step towards something I couldn't predict. I wasn't just walking away from a fight. I was walking away from the life I thought I'd known. And I had no idea if there was any going back. I opened the door quietly, careful not to make too much noise. The house was dark, the air still and heavy. It felt different, like it wasn't even mine anymore. I moved through the hall toward the bedroom, the soft creak of the floorboards the only sound breaking the silence. In the corner of my eye, I saw a light seeping under Jennifer's door, so she wasn't sleeping after all. I quickly grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started throwing clothes inside, not caring what I took. I just needed to leave. The sound of footsteps behind me stopped me in my tracks. I turned around and there she was. Michelle stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face expressionless, like she didn't have a single care in the world. She looked at me like I was the one causing the problem, like I was just another inconvenience in her perfectly planned life. "So you're really leaving?" she asked, her voice devoid of any emotion. I zipped up the bag, not looking at her. "Yeah, I am." For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd say something, apologize, beg me to stay, show even the tiniest flicker of remorse. But of course, that was wishful thinking. Michelle wasn't the kind of person to admit she was wrong. "Good," she said simply. "Maybe it's for the best. We need a break anyway. We need a break." The audacity of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. After everything that had happened tonight, after what I'd seen, this was all she had to say. No apology, no explanation, just a break. I swung the bag over my shoulder and walked past her, stopping just short of the door. "You know, Michelle, I never thought it would come to this. I thought we were better than this." She didn't even flinch, just gave me a bored look. "Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to spend all your time at work." There it was again. The deflection, the blame shifting. She wasn't going to take responsibility for any of it. In her mind, this was all on me. I clenched my jaw, biting back the anger that threatened to spill over. "You're unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head as I walked out of the room. I didn't look back as I headed down the hall, past Jennifer's door, past the living room where everything had fallen apart. My chest felt tight, my mind spinning, but I forced myself to keep moving. Step by step, I was leaving behind the life I thought I had. As I stepped outside into the night air, the door closing behind me with a soft click, I realized this wasn't just the end of the night. It was the end of something much bigger. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, and for a split second I thought it might be Michelle, or even Jennifer, but it wasn't. It was Steve, checking in, asking if I was okay. I glanced back at the house one last time before getting into the car. I wasn't okay. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, this was the first step towards something better. It felt like I was floating outside my own body, disconnected from everything I thought I knew. My mind kept circling back to the same question over and over again. How did it come to this? I pulled into a quiet parking lot of a closed diner, the neon sign flickering weakly against the dark. My hands were trembling as I gripped the steering wheel, staring into the emptiness. There were no answers, no easy solutions waiting for me here, just the dull ache of realization sinking in deeper. This is it, I thought, trying to process the fact that my life was falling apart. I'd walked out on my wife, maybe for good. I couldn't even bring myself to think about Jennifer. The betrayal cutting too deep. I knew I had to deal with it eventually, but right now I couldn't. Not tonight. My phone buzzed in my pocket again, snapping me out of the haze. I glanced at the screen. It was Steve. I let out a sigh and hit the call button, bringing the phone to my ear. Yeah. You good, man? His voice was steady, but I could hear the concern behind it. No, I replied honestly, leaning back against the headrest. Not even close. Steve was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again. I figured as much. You need a place to crash. The guest room's open. I thought about it for a moment. I hadn't even considered where I'd stay for the night. The thought of going to a hotel felt too cold, too impersonal, but crashing at Steve's felt like admitting defeat. Still, what choice did I have? Yeah, I said, rubbing my eyes. I'll be there in a few. The drive to Steve's was short, and when I pulled up outside his place, I sat there for a moment, staring at the warm lights glowing from the windows. It was strange seeing a home that wasn't mine, a place where things hadn't just imploded. I missed that feeling, the comfort, the security. But that was gone now. I grabbed my bag from the back seat and headed toward the front door. Steve opened it before I even had a chance to knock. Come on in, he said, stepping aside. Figured you could use a drink. I nodded, stepping inside. The warmth of his home was almost suffocating after the coldness of my own. The soft hum of the heater, the familiar clutter of a lived-in home, it all felt foreign now. Steve led me into the living room, where a half-empty bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses waited on the coffee table. He poured a generous amount into each glass and handed one to me. Cheers, he said, raising his glass. To surviving the worst day of your life. I gave a bitter laugh and clinked my glass against his. Here's to that, I muttered before taking a long drink. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it felt good. Grounding. Steve sat back in his chair, watching me with a quiet intensity. So, he said, after a moment, you ready to talk about it? I let out a long breath, staring at the glass in my hands. I don't even know where to start, man. Everything's a mess. Michelle, Jennifer, all of it. It's like I walked into someone else's life. Steve nodded, understanding in his eyes. I get it. I mean, I don't. Not really, but I get that feeling. Like the rug's been pulled out from under you. Yeah, I muttered, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. She didn't even care, Steve. She just sat there, like I was the one causing all the problems. Like she had every right to do what she did. And Jennifer, he asked carefully, his voice low, like he didn't want to push too hard but knew he had to ask. I swallowed hard, the ache in my chest intensifying. I don't know, man. I don't know how to process that. I mean, she's my daughter, and she's just involved in all of this. Like it doesn't even matter. Steve's expression hardened. That's rough, Greg. Really rough. But you can't let her off the hook. She made her own choices too. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I don't even know how to approach her after this. How do I look at my own daughter the same way after seeing that? Steve took a deep breath, leaning forward. You don't. Not right away, anyway. But you've got to talk to her, Greg. She's still your kid. She's got to hear from you. This situation, it's messed up. But you can't walk away from that conversation forever. I nodded. But the thought of talking to Jennifer felt like a mountain I couldn't climb right now. "I'll figure it out," I said, more to convince myself than him. Steve poured another round of whiskey and passed me the glass. "Look, man, I know this is the hardest thing you've probably ever been through, but you're not alone. You've got me, and we'll figure it out. But you need to take care of yourself first. Get your head straight. That's the only way you're going to get through this." I took the glass, grateful for the momentary distraction the whiskey offered. "Yeah," I muttered. "You're right." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure what getting my head straight would even look like. My life had been blown apart, and I had no idea how to start picking up the pieces. The night stretched on as we sat there, talking in circles, the whiskey dulling the edges of my pain, but never fully taking it away. Steve was right, though. I couldn't avoid this forever. At some point, I'd have to face the mess that was now my reality. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me, and Steve showed me to the guest room. It was small but comfortable, the bed neatly made. I dropped my bag at the foot of the bed and sank into the mattress, the weight of the day finally hitting me all at once. But even as I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, my mind wouldn't stop racing. How was I going to fix this? Could it even be fixed? I wasn't sure. The sun broke through the blinds, casting a soft glow over the guest room. I hadn't slept much, my mind too consumed with everything that had happened the night before. The bed beneath me felt foreign, too clean and too quiet for the chaos raging inside my head. I stared up at the ceiling, feeling numb, disconnected from everything that used to feel real. Steve had been right, leaving was the only option. But now, in the light of day, the gravity of that decision weighed heavier. What was I going to do next? How could I face the fallout from all of this? Divorce seemed inevitable, but the thought of breaking apart our family felt like admitting total defeat. How had my own daughter ended up so far away from me? How had she become someone I couldn't recognize? I groaned and sat up, rubbing my face, trying to shake off the heaviness. I could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the faint sound of Steve moving around the house reached my ears. He was probably waiting for me to come down, probably ready to offer more advice that I wasn't ready to hear. I pulled on the same clothes from last night, not caring about appearances. The man in the mirror looked like a wreck, unshaven, eyes red from lack of sleep, a deep crease of exhaustion lining my forehead. But that was the least of my problems. I couldn't focus on myself, not yet. When I stepped into the kitchen, Steve glanced up from his cup of coffee, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said, pushing a mug across the table toward me. "Rough night, I'm guessing." I grunted in response, taking the coffee without a word. I wasn't in the mood to talk, but I knew he meant well. The bitter taste of the coffee grounded me, but only for a moment. "So, what's the plan?" Steve asked after a long pause. He sat down across from me, his gaze steady, waiting. I shrugged, staring into my cup. "I don't know. I guess I need to figure out what to do with Michelle first. Get a lawyer, maybe. I'm not even sure where to start." Steve nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's going to be a long process, man, but you've got to protect yourself. Don't let her walk all over you and Jennifer. Well, that's another conversation you need to have. But I wouldn't rush it. Not until you're ready." I knew he was right. Everything about this situation was going to take time, but time was the one thing I didn't want to deal with. The longer I thought about it, the more it hurt. I wanted a quick solution, something to make the pain go away, but there wasn't one. There was only the long, brutal road ahead of me. I finished my coffee and stood up. "I think I need to go back to the house." Steve raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I mean, after last night..." "I'm not ready," I interrupted, "but I need to get some things." But when I opened the door, I heard movement in the kitchen. Great. I hesitated for a moment, then walked inside. Michelle was standing by the counter, pouring herself a cup of coffee like it was any other normal morning. When she saw me, she barely blinked. There was no apology in her eyes, no regret, just the same cold indifference I'd seen last night. "You're back," she said flatly, not even bothering to ask where I'd been or how I was feeling. I'm here to get some stuff, I replied, my voice tight. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. I just wanted to get in and out. Michelle shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. Do whatever you need to do. Her casual attitude made my blood boil. How could she act so unaffected, so untouched by everything that had happened? Didn't she care at all? I didn't respond, just turned toward the bedroom. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked away, but I didn't look back. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of another confrontation. Once inside the bedroom, I quickly gathered the rest of my clothes, stuffing them into the same duffel bag I'd packed last night. But as I grabbed the last of my things, I noticed the picture on the nightstand, one of the few things I hadn't thought to take last night. It was a photo of me, Michelle, and Jennifer, taken years ago. We looked happy, genuinely happy. I picked it up, staring at the smiles on our faces, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. The life we'd built together felt like a distant memory now, one that had been replaced by lies, betrayal, and emptiness. I shoved the picture into the bag and zipped it up, feeling a pang of sadness that I couldn't shake. As I made my way back toward the front door, Michelle was still standing in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like I didn't exist. I stopped for a moment, wanting to say something, anything, to break through the wall between us. But there was no point. Whatever we'd had was gone. I opened the door and stepped outside, but just as I was about to close it behind me, I heard her voice, cold and sharp like a knife. You know, Greg, you should have seen this coming. I froze, the words sinking into me like poison. Excuse me? I turned back to face her, my heart pounding in my chest. Michelle didn't even look up from her phone. You've been so focused on work, on everything else, you didn't notice what was happening right in front of you. This is as much your fault as it is mine. Her words hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to say something, to defend myself, but nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. I turned around and walked out, letting the door close behind me with a final thud. As I walked down the driveway, my mind reeled from Michelle's final words. You should have seen this coming. They echoed in my head, each repetition digging deeper into my skull, driving me further into the ground. The duffel bag felt heavier with every step, as if it carried not just my clothes, but the weight of all the years wasted with her. I tossed the bag into the back seat of my car, slamming the door shut with more force than necessary. I couldn't go back in there, couldn't face her smug indifference again. I needed to leave, but something in me hesitated. Something told me I wasn't done yet. Without really thinking about it, I pulled out my phone and dialed Jennifer's number. The ringing felt like it lasted forever, my heart pounding in my chest as I wondered if she'd even pick up. After everything, I wasn't sure if I even wanted her to. But I couldn't avoid this any longer. Finally, there was a click, and her voice came through, surprisingly steady. Dad, for a moment I didn't know what to say. Hearing her call me Dad made everything feel more real, more painful. This was my little girl, my daughter. The one person I thought I could always protect, always trust. And yet, here we were. I need to talk to you, Jennifer, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. About last night. There was a pause and I could hear her shift, maybe pacing the floor or sitting down, but she didn't hang up. I figured you'd call eventually. Her tone was so casual, like we were just discussing a minor argument or some misunderstanding. That coldness in her voice, just like her mother's, made my blood boil again, but I forced myself to stay calm. Why? I asked, my throat tightening with the weight of everything I wanted to say. Why were you a part of this? How could you sit there with those men, knowing what it was doing to me? Knowing what it would do to our family? Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. It's not what you think, Dad. I felt my grip on the phone tighten. Not what I think. Jennifer, I walked in on you and your mother, both of you, with two strange men in our house. What the hell am I supposed to think? She sighed, frustration creeping into her voice. Look, Dad, I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It got out of hand. I didn't know how to stop it. Out of hand? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You didn't know how to stop it. You didn't know. My voice was rising now, my anger starting to bubble over. You're a grown woman, Jennifer. You could have stopped it the second it started. You chose to be there. She let out a shaky breath, and for the first time, I heard a crack in her confidence. It's more complicated than that, Dad. Mom. Mom's been in my head for a long time, but I never heard the rest of her sentence. A sudden movement caught my attention from the corner of my eye, and when I turned my head, I saw Michelle standing in the doorway. Her arms were crossed, her face expressionless, just like always, but there was something different in her eyes. Something cold, calculating. And she wasn't alone. A man, one of the men from last night, stepped out from behind her, leaning against the doorframe as if he belonged there. My heart stopped. What the hell is he doing here? I demanded, my voice barely holding back the rage. Jennifer was saying something on the phone, but I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could see was this man, standing in my doorway in my house, like he had every right to be there. Michelle smiled, but it wasn't a smile I recognized. It was twisted, malicious, like she'd been waiting for this moment. He's staying here, Greg. I thought I'd made that clear. You're the one who needs to move on. Michelle didn't even flinch. She just shrugged, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Well, you're not here anymore, are you? What did you think was going to happen? I'm tired of pretending, Greg. This is the way things are now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like some twisted version of reality, and I was trapped inside it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, but nothing added up. How had we gone from a broken marriage to this? How could she think this was okay? Dad. Jennifer's voice pulled me back to the phone, her tone sharper now, more insistent. Dad, listen to me. There's more going on here than you know. I tried to tell you last night, but... What more could there possibly be, Jennifer? I snapped, my voice cracking. Your mother's shacking up with some guy, and you're part of it. What else is there to know? Jennifer hesitated, and then she dropped the bomb. Mom's been seeing him for years, Dad. And it's not just him. I felt the blood drain from my face. What are you talking about? I didn't want to tell you this way, but you need to know, Jennifer said, her voice trembling. She's been working with these guys. They're not just some random men. They've been helping her, Dad, helping her plan everything. My heart pounded in my chest, the world tilting on its axis. Helping her plan what, Jennifer? And then the words came, the ones that shattered whatever was left of the life I thought I knew. Mom's been planning to take everything from you. The house, the money, all of it. She's been waiting for you to screw up, to get out of the way. These guys, they're part of it. You were never supposed to know. The room spun, and I felt like I was about to collapse. The man in the doorway smirked, his eyes gleaming with amusement, as if he knew exactly what was going through my mind. Michelle stepped forward, her smile widening. It's not personal, Greg. It's just business. The world seemed to close in on me, the walls of the life I thought I'd built collapsing all at once. They thought they'd won, but I wasn't going to go down that easily. I see you've made your choice, I said, my voice cold, my eyes locked on Michelle's. You've been planning this for a long time, haven't you? She tilted her head, her smile never fading. Long enough, Greg. You were too busy working, too distracted to notice what was happening right in front of you. And now, well, you're out of the picture. I forced a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just take everything and walk away clean? Her eyes flickered, just for a second, with something like uncertainty. But then she shrugged. I don't think, Greg. I know. Everything is already in place. The papers are drawn up. You've been too blind to see what's been happening for years. I clenched my fists, feeling the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. But I kept my cool. I had to. If I exploded now, she'd use it against me. No, I needed to play this smart. I guess I underestimated you, I said, my tone sharp. You've turned this into some kind of game, but let me make one thing clear. I'm not going to let you take everything from me. Michelle's smirk faltered, just a little. The man beside her shifted uncomfortably, his arms crossing as if he were waiting for something. I could tell they hadn't expected this reaction. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I lied, knowing it was the only card I had to play right now. There's no way in hell you're getting away with this. You can try, but I'll fight you every step of the way. That seemed to hit a nerve. Michelle's eyes narrowed, her cool facade cracking ever so slightly. You think you can stop this? Greg, you're in way over your head. We'll see, I said, taking a step toward the door. But one thing's for sure, I'm not going to let you control me anymore. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I knew I couldn't stay any longer. Never. Not now. Not until I had a plan. I grabbed my car keys, my heart pounding in my chest, and without another word, I walked out the door. This time it wasn't a retreat. It was a step toward taking control of my own life again. As I drove away from the house, my house not hers, I felt the weight lifting ever so slightly. There was still anger, still betrayal coursing through me. But now there was something else. Clarity. I wasn't the clueless husband anymore. I wasn't the victim of some elaborate game. I knew what I was up against now, and I wasn't going to let Michelle win. I parked at a nearby cafe, my hands shaking as I dialed Steve's number. He picked up after a couple of rings. Greg, you all right? His voice was cautious, concerned. No, I admitted, staring out at the street. But I'm getting there. I need your help. Over the next few weeks, everything became a blur of meetings with lawyers, accountants, and anyone else I could find to help me unravel the mess Michelle had made. It turned out she had been planning this for years, slowly siphoning money from our joint accounts, setting things up so that when the time came, she'd be able to walk away with almost everything. But thanks to Jennifer's reluctant confession and the legal team I'd pulled together, I was able to stop her before she could finalize her plan. In the end, the divorce was ugly, brutal even. Michelle fought tooth and nail, but she didn't win. She walked away with less than she'd hoped, her plan exposed for what it was, a bitter, calculated attempt to strip me of everything. The man she'd brought into our home vanished once he realized there was nothing left to gain, and Jennifer, well, things with Jennifer were complicated. The day the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting in the same cafe where I'd called Steve that first night. The weight of it all was still there, but it felt lighter now. There was no satisfaction in seeing Michelle lose, just a hollow kind of relief that it was finally over. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Jennifer. Dad, I know things aren't great between us right now, but I want to talk. I miss you. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The pain of her involvement in everything still ran deep, but she was still my daughter. And maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something out of the wreckage. I typed back a short reply. I miss you too. Let's talk. As I set the phone down, I realized that this was the first time in a long while that I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I was no longer the man Michelle had tried to destroy. I was still here, and I was ready to move forward, no matter what came next.